I think we've got a good session ahead of us. I'd like to introduce you to our panel chair, who's Cliff Fluet at Lewis Silkin. And Cliff, maybe you can tell them a little bit more about yourself and introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Sure. Excuse me, thank you. First off, I just must say I'm getting on the other side of a cold, so I'm sounding a bit prepubescent at the moment. So if there's any wobbles, please do bear with me. This panel is about life, city law life. There are some people out there that would have you believe that there isn't one, and I think that what we're trying to do is make sure that we dispel that myth. By way of introduction, I'm Cliff. I am a partner at the law firm Lewis Silkin. I originally qualified at a firm by the name of Cameron McKenna, and then I left there, and for 10 years, I was an in-house lawyer as well. I was 10 years latterly a general counsel and company secretary of a PLC. And then 6 years ago, I joined my firm, Lewis Silkin, as a partner, where I specialise on digital media and branded entertainment. And also, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the panel. The first question I'm going to throw open to the panel is a little bit about yourselves and your background and what's taken you to where you are now. And there's also one question that I'm going to hide into everything, which is how did you pick the law firm that you first went to? My choice was, it was the largest firm at the time that did media, and it was a random and as you know, sort of crazy a choice as that, but it stood me in very, very good stead for the rest of my career. So, Paul.
Okay, I'm a bit croaky as well. I'm Paul Randall. I'm a partner in Ashurst, and I head what we call the equity incentives practice, which is employee share plans and employee trusts. Executive remuneration, or rather topical stuff at the moment for us and clients. I have been at Ashurst actually for nearly 25 years, although I didn't start there. I started life as a private client tax lawyer with a firm called Wedlake Bell in the West End. And it's such a long time ago, trying to remember whether I chose them or they chose me is quite difficult, really. And it was a very sort of different world. You know, there was much less information available than there is now. And indeed, probably practically nothing, I mean, other than the material the firms themselves put out. So at that stage, I was applying sort of here, there and everywhere. I had no sort of family connections with the law. And I happen to rather like them. I mean, I went very much by the nature of the interviews that I had. And I've always rather followed that. If I like people, then they're the people I want to work with, and that stood me in good stead.
Great. Delphine.
Hi, I'm Delphine Currie, and I'm a partner at the law firm S.J. Berwin. Like Paul, I'm a long-timer. I joined about 23 years ago, and it was my first job. I joined as an article clerk, as we were called then, and I qualified into the corporate department and became a partner there in the mid-90s. Like Paul, I had very little information. I actually wanted to do EU law, so I applied to every single firm that had an office in Brussels, which seemed like a good idea at the time. And I had a number of interviews, and I hated the interviews at the Magic Circle firms, and they seemed to hate me as well because they didn't offer me a job. And I quite liked the people at S.J. Berwin. They were quite exciting, and it was a young firm, and it just felt right. So pretty much like Paul, I went on my gut instinct, and it proved to be the right decision.
Anthony, we heard more about your career latterly, but tell us about your route to qualification.
Yeah, so I'm from the northeast, and so when I first came to think about a career in law, I was at first, do I want to work in Newcastle or do I want to come into London? So I think one of the things that helped me with my decision process was doing summer placements. And I did a summer placement at Berwin Leighton in my second year, and that really kind of helped focus my mind that I wanted to work in the city. And then I think for me it was, well, I want to work for one of the, they weren't called Magic Circle firms in those days, I'm showing my age again, but I decided I wanted to do that. And for me at the time, Lovells was the right cultural fit for me. It wasn't Lovells, and it was Lovell, White, Durant, and it had just merged. And it was a combination of two medium-sized firms. So for me, it had the attraction of being a big city law firm, but with the culture of a medium-sized firm, which really appealed to me. So I think for me, culture was one of the key things that drove my decision.
Lucy?
I would completely agree with actually what everybody said. Baker and McKenzie felt like it was the right place for me. I went to Exeter University and studied law and French law, and actually spent some time at university in France as well. So when I was looking at which law firm I wanted to join, Baker and McKenzie stood out to me because it's so international. But more than that, I wasn't quite sure which area of the law I would want to go into. So it appealed to me because it has real breadth of practice with lots of practice groups which are very strong. And the deciding factor was actually I felt like I'd feel comfortable working there. I liked the people I'd met. I attended lots of these types of things as well, and everybody I spoke to seemed like I would enjoy working with them. And the deciding factor for me was my interview, which actually felt very collaborative, and the partners were very keen to hear what I had to say, as opposed to other interviews which I went to, which a couple of them felt as if I was just there really to listen to the interviewers. So that was it for me.
Well, there are a couple of things I'd like to pick up from there which I thought were really, really positive. I think Delphine and Paul made it very clear that actually you have a choice. You know, understanding where you have the greatest rapport rather than just going for the firm that's biggest, which is a ludicrous metric, but as a training partner was probably the one I was confronted with the most. So I think it's fantastic. And I'd also underline that point about the importance of summer placements. I made my decision based upon actually going to those bigger Magic Circle firms and realising it just wasn't for me. It wasn't that it was bad, it wasn't that it was good, it just was not for me. And for me, I found that very, very decisive in terms of sort of saying no to those offers and just thinking, look, I want to go the place that's right for me as well. Now, the other thing I'd like to say is that when I applied, it was in 1992, 20 years ago, when there was a horrible recession on and I was told that there were no jobs for trainees. Sound familiar, anyone? Anyway, so I'd like to throw open to the panel really about the current economy on a global basis as well as locally as well, and what impact we think that's going to have in relation to graduate recruitment, job hunters and people looking for a role right now. Paul?
Yeah, it's clearly a very difficult environment all round. It's difficult for us as a business, it's difficult for our clients. And so it's become a much tougher environment for everyone. And I think we've also noticed an increase in the number of applications, because I suspect people who might not have chosen the law are looking for what they may see as a safer harbour in stormy seas. And that just sort of, if you like, adds to the difficulty that we have as recruiters of, if you like, getting from the paper application through to the interviews and through to the offers. So it's tough. But I think the law firms, I mean, one or two, as we know, have fallen by the wayside for one reason or another, normally because they slightly got out of just the business of giving legal advice for one reason or another. But I think the firms that, you know, firms have had now some years of this recession to batten down the hatches, and they've got their finances sorted out, and the recruitment machine carries on, because one of the things I do remember from a previous recession was when recruitment just dried up. It left you with a sort of gap that then travelled right the way through the firm over sort of 15 years, and frankly was you know, not a good thing for the firm itself. So, you know, our recruitment process continues, and there may be perhaps like fewer places, more competition, but it's very much alive and kicking.
Delphine, do you think going to a law firm or going to the city or even within commerce as well, Anthony, which I'll come on to in a moment, is it a safe harbour? Is it going to be a less stormy port for people to dock in?
Well, I think it is relatively safe, but you know, nowhere is completely safe. And I think, you know, it's an old saying is that, you know, people always want lawyers. We're a little bit like, you know, we're like leeches, if you like, but at good times or bad times, people need lawyers. In bad times, there may not be as much corporate work or as much real estate work as there is in boom times, but it probably means that the litigators are a little bit busier, or the reconstruction insolvency lawyers are a little bit busier. So I think provided you're flexible and are willing to turn your hand to, you know, things that perhaps aren't necessarily your core skills or what you necessarily want to be doing, if you're prepared to go a little bit out of your comfort zone and try different things, and I think there are still opportunities. And, you know, firms are still recruiting. They may have scaled back slightly, but I mean, most firms are still recruiting at pretty much the same levels as they were a few years ago. So I think there are still opportunities, but I would say, you know, be flexible. You can't go into a firm thinking, I want to do this one thing and I want to do this one thing for the rest of my career. Over my 20 years, I've always done corporate law, but I've focused in different areas. You know, 5 years ago, I was doing lots of IPOs. Hardly any IPOs these days. So, you know, you have to be flexible and use your skills where they're needed.
Anthony, you told us the story of Kai, and you know it wasn't obvious or easy for you to make the business case from what I inferred from that as well. But you did make it.
He did make it, and I think, as I said in my presentation, we're now in a very exciting time for the legal world. And I think the other key thing to just draw out is that, you know, what you've embarked on already is learning a great skill in terms of law, which of all the disciplines you can do, I think has probably one of the most general applications in business generally. So I think, you know, to the last point, keep your options open, keep your ideas open about what you can do with this great learning you've done. As for the legal world, as for the working in the city, I think there's a combination of things coming into play. Obviously, there's talk of further recession, there's a challenge of what's going to happen in Europe with the Eurozone, and then potentially in the US. But the reality of it is, wherever there are challenges in an environment like this, there are always opportunities. And I think lawyers are always important in helping business exploit those opportunities. I think if you look at the legal profession itself as well, I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's consolidation, there's some firms, as Paul said, falling by the wayside, and there's different business models evolving. So I think the legal profession is really in a very exciting time. It's going to evolve, I think, probably to a state of being unrecognizable from where it is now over the next 10 to 15 years. And you've got a great opportunity to be part of it. And but you have, as you said, it's about being flexible in terms of how you approach it.
Lucy, as our most sort of recent qualifier, and I don't want to be ageist in that way, but there was you starting your recession in 2008 when it really started to bite. What advice would you have for people in the audience about, you know, what it's like to navigate those stormy waters? And
well, actually, I would say that my intake was probably the last intake to join in the boom time. But as you say, I've joined the firm, and it's been in the middle of a recession. So I would just say that I'm sure you're all actually doing the right thing by being enthusiastic and coming to these sorts of events. This will look great on your CV and really help you stand out from the crowd. Yeah, I think you're doing the right thing. Just keep going to careers fairs, keep coming to conferences like this.
From my work area, one thing I think about this sort of massive issues thrown up means that, you know, the focus upon intellectual property and the digital economy and Creative Britain and the digital industry, as we stop making things that you can touch and feel, we're monetizing data, we're monetizing rights. So actually, to a certain extent, it's been a bit of a boom for our end of the market, whereas before it wouldn't necessarily seen as lucrative in other areas as well. So back to Delphine's point, that actually by remaining flexible, there is significant opportunity. Now, a quick word about questions. If anyone's got a burning question, please do put your hand up or scribble it down. Or, I know that I'm told that Twitter is for oldies like me, but I am keeping an eye on the Twitter fall as well. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask via Twitter, but don't want to necessarily put your hand up, as it were, then please do let me know. Now, I'm going to come on to a question that's often thrown up as part of differentiation and standing out from the crowd in applications about languages and the usefulness therefore, of languages. Delphine and Paul, you both work for international law firms, as it were. I mean, to what extent and in what ways are those language skills helpful?
You want to go first? Or shall I go first?
I'm happy either way.
I sat in on some interviews. I do quite a lot of interviewing for Ashurst, and we always do it as sort of two partners. And I sat in on a number of interviews where one of my partners, whenever the candidate mentioned that I speak German or I speak Mandarin or whatever it was, he said, well, yeah, so I've got people who speak German and I've got people who speak French. So why does that help me? Which I thought was a bit sort of unfair and a bit harsh in the context of the interview. But I'm the good cop, he's the bad cop. But I don't think myself, even in the context of a multinational firm like mine, that languages are that desperately important. It undoubtedly helps, and trainees now regularly go to offices certainly around Europe and further afield. But when it comes down to it, I don't think sort of linguistic skills are, if you like, a decisive factor in whether or not somebody goes. They'll undoubtedly go through a pretty intense session before they go, because you need I think just to live in a different country, you need a certain basic amount of language. But business language is, by its nature, different from la plume de ma tante and all that sort of thing, and booking a table in a restaurant. So I would personally get unduly hung up about it, but it is certainly as business increasingly comes from the East, very much on people's minds at the moment.
No, I would agree with that. The language skills that you're likely to use when you start practicing, you're unlikely to use your language skills on a transaction or in the work that you're doing if you're based in London, but they will undoubtedly become useful if you do go on a secondment or spend time in an overseas office. And again, although the business at that office may be done in English or predominantly in English, you will need the language skills to live in the country, as Paul said. One other observation that I would make is that having a language skill is undoubtedly useful just in the broader context of understanding another culture. And a lot of the work that we do these days, particularly as law becomes more global and so many transactions or legal cases are multi-jurisdictional, the ability to appreciate a different culture and to appreciate the fact that lawyers and business people in other countries may operate in a slightly different manner, that is absolutely, that's really, really important. So I wouldn't underestimate that.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
Anthony, you talked about having to work on a sort of a pan-global business, really.
Yeah.
Tell us to what extent that you've found yourself having to deploy languages or work with people in various...
Well, although a lot of businesses, as I've already mentioned, conducted in English, it has been enormously helpful. And one of the, when I first joined, we had the team, the legal team, was based in Boston, and of American lawyers. And what we did when I joined, and the whole point of the role was to build up a team with other language capability. And we have hired one person recently, for example, who speaks 7 languages fluently, which is amazing. And that's really opened up again further the opportunity for our team to work directly with our Spanish and Iberian and Swedish colleagues directly in their own language, which they love. So I think other languages, particularly in the business environment, can be immensely helpful. But if you're in the position of thinking, well, I'm about to learn a language, then I think there is some strategy you can, to the extent you have the intellect to choose between them. I think, going for the standard German and French, I would be kind of, if you're having the luxury of thinking, I'd be kind of more focused on, China, languages that are useful, increasingly useful, I think, are Eastern European as well, Russian, within the dialects within Russia, and probably Middle East. So that if you're thinking of learning language, maybe focus on those ones.
Yeah, thank you. And on that point, just before here, I won't name any names, but just before the session, I was asked my least favourite question that I always get as training partner, which is where do you have offices? To which I always say London and Oxford, but I have been in Cupertino, in Seattle, and in Texas in the last 3 weeks, as it were. So this whole idea about where you've got an office or the global nature of your business is a bit strange. But I want to talk about working overseas with Lucy, because you not only did a client secondment, but you also worked in an overseas office as well. Could you tell us more about what that experience was like?
Yeah, sure. So I was seconded to Baker & McKenzie's office in Hong Kong as part of my training contract, and I spent 4 months out there in our commercial and securities group. I don't speak Cantonese or Mandarin, and it wasn't a requirement, obviously, of going to that office, of being able to speak those languages, because we certainly have people based in the office and people we work with externally who do speak it fluently. But while I was out there, it did allow me to pick up a tiny bit of the language. I'm not professing to be an expert at all. And also to learn much more about the culture and the business culture in Hong Kong. As part of one of the projects that I was working on, I was asked to go to the target business that our client was buying and spend a couple of weeks in the office, and it was a very local Hong Kong office. Which was a completely different and fascinating experience, and something that I would never have been exposed to otherwise, just being based in the City of London. So while I didn't speak Cantonese, it has never held me back. And actually, I do speak French because I did French law as my degree, but I don't necessarily use that in my day-to-day working life in London. I think, as a couple of the other panellists have said, it's very helpful for creating rapport with clients or your colleagues. Often I would pick up the phone and speak to our Paris office in French, have a little chat with them. But then my personal tendency is to revert to English when I'm talking about the law, because it's so important to be precise, and I'd hate for a slight blip in my French to create some misunderstanding.
Okay. Moving on to another thing you've done, I'm going to come back to you, Lucy, as well, which is during your training you were on secondment for a while, weren't you?
Yes. Actually, that was as an associate.
Oh, that was an associate. Forgive me. Once qualified, you were on client secondment. Tell us more about what that experience was like.
So this was from May to December last year. I was sent on secondment to Siemens PLC, based in Surrey, and that's the headquarters of their UK operations. I think quite different to a lot of other in-house legal teams. The legal team at Siemens is actually quite big, around 40 to 50 people. So perhaps you might consider it a hybrid of private practice and in-house. But I felt that it was a great experience, great for young lawyers to do. It really helped me build my confidence, so that when I came back to the office in London, I didn't feel daunted or intimidated going to a client meeting, because I'd been used to advising people within the business at Siemens on my own, and actually in a completely different specialism of the law. I was working in commercial law at Siemens as opposed to being a corporate lawyer at Baker's.
Anthony, do you take secondees from your panel law firms?
We do.
Can you tell us why?
Well, there's several reasons why you might take a secondee. The two main ones would be, perhaps if we're doing a project and you need a specialist input for that, you take a secondee for the period of time of that project. But another reason is often, for example, one of my team will be going on maternity leave very soon, and she does a fantastic job, and there'll be a vacuum there for a while. So one way to fill that gap will be to bring a secondee for the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months that she's away. So it's kind of a combination of bringing in specialist skills and or a sort of dip in resources, either by increased work or by someone leaving.
Okay. Delphine, I've noticed that the request And the number of requests from clients for secondees has gone up and up, particularly over the last couple of years, for reasons that I'm sure are obvious as well. But from a law firm perspective, sending your best and brightest away, tell us the pros and cons, please.
Well, it's always difficult because you need to send one of your best associates, because you're putting them into one of your key clients, so you can't afford to send somebody who's going to create a bad impression. So the chief con, if you like, is that you're going to lose one of your brightest associates for up to 6 months, which is always difficult because it puts added pressure on the people who remain behind, because they have to pick up the other associate's workload. But the pro, I suppose the pros are twofold. From the client's point of view, you're hopefully creating a very good impression with the client. They're delighted that they've got the added resource and the expertise. Hopefully the associate will get on very well with them, so that when they come back, there's that added dimension to the client relationship. And I suppose that there's also a very important advantage for the associate who goes, and that, like Lucy, they get to see what law is like in a business environment, and quite often they come back a little bit more commercially focused, and they've obviously got very in-depth knowledge of the client, which is very important for our firm, because that can again help to develop the relationship with the client. So although it's a wrench to lose the associate, and it's always it's always a difficult decision to make, I think it is actually win-win-win all round for the client, for the associate, and for the firm as well.
And Paul, do you ever send trainees on secondment?
We do sometimes, and that's typically, trainees will go into clients from time to time. It's probably less common than seconding associates for us, though. But I certainly agree with what's been said before. It just goes to forging and strengthening the relationship, and I mean, occasionally the secondee hasn't come back for one reason or another. Their head has been turned while they are away.
But there's a new client.
But that's indeed, and so it's I think on balance it's always a good thing. And we also have some secondments, not just to clients, but to places like the FSA, for example, and the Listing Authority in the past, which are also very, they're interesting for the individual, and they're very valuable for us as well.
Great. Now, I'm going to come over to the issue of life in the city. That's both in-house and private practice as well, and reconciling personal and family life with a career in the city as well. Delphine, tell us your reflections really in terms of how you balance the two.
Well, I like to think that it can be done. I'm slightly unusual in that, although I'm a partner in a corporate department at a large city firm, I also managed to combine that with children. My daughter is a similar age to yourself. She's just started university, and I have a 15-year-old son. So for most of my time as an associate, and in fact all of my time as a partner, I've had to juggle the two. And it can be done. I sit here having managed it with reasonable success for nearly 20 years. But what I would say is that it does require a great deal of organisation. You always have to think about what your priorities are to get everything done during the working day so that you can be home for the family in the evening. You need to be flexible. You can't say every night I'm going to leave the office at 6 o'clock, because there will be occasions when clients need you in the office in the evening. So you need to have a very good support network. Whether that is a very supportive husband or family in the area, and you do need to have a very good child care system in place. But I think with all those things, organisation, flexibility, and a good support network, it can be done, and it's very rewarding. I like to think that both sides of my life have benefited the other. You know, if I hadn't had a happy family life, I might not have been such a good lawyer, and vice versa.
Anthony, I think in your presentation you really did put to the sword that myth, and it is totally untrue about in-house lawyers having an easier life, as it were. And you've talked about how only this morning, you know, you've got new instructions on something that needs to be done in an impossible timescale as well. Yeah. Tell us about sort of the ability to reconcile that with an in-house career.
It is a challenge, and I think it's one that I'm still working on, I think. It's a balance that you have to constantly battle with, but it can be done, as has been said. I think the in-house environment potentially does offer a little bit more flexibility than perhaps private practice, in that in my role, provided I can get a mobile connection and an internet connection, I'm pretty much good to go. I've worked in all manner of places, airports, hotel rooms, at home. And you know, the general counsel who I work for and the business I work for don't actually care where I do the job, provided that when something needs to be done, that needs to be done. And also, I'm lucky in that the culture of Boston Consulting and all the places I've worked at, in fact, so far, have been supportive of family values. And you know, yes, clients always come first to some degree, but there's a sense of, you know, if you need, my boss has regularly said to me, look, if you need to go off and do that, like I've just been on my honeymoon, you know, take that time out, because I can cover for you, the team will cover for you, just take the time, because you need it. And so it can be done, and I think maybe the in-house environment gives a little bit more flexibility, but has to be debated, I don't know.
Lucy, my memory of being a trainee was a litany of friends getting really, really pissed off with me, not turning up to gigs, or being at a restaurant, or blah, blah. Tell us about your experiences as from a trainee perspective of balancing that.
Perhaps actually I can talk about last night. I had a dinner last night that I had agreed to go to with some of my friends from Hong Kong. And this was just in the city, and I was meant to be there at 7:30. But I had to send a report out to a client, so I didn't actually make it until 8:30. But I think having understanding friends and having lots of lawyer friends helps, because everybody understands that your career might be unpredictable. And as I was saying to you actually earlier, Cliff, I don't think that having slight element of unpredictability to your career is something that's just something that affects the legal profession. I think it is also common to other careers. So I have a friend who's trying to carve out a niche for herself in the PR industry. And she often has to work late at short notice. If, for example, there's an unfavourable article reported about one of her clients, she will have to stay through the night to try and manage that. And other careers also have events that you might have to attend, for example, at the weekend or in the evenings, not only law.
Paul, my firm is quite well known for sort of maintaining publicly and to clients about a work-life balance. But at the end of the day, if a client needs something in improbable timescales, it gets delivered.
Yep.
What are law firms doing in order to sort of help their staff in terms of work-life balance?
Yes, I mean it's a big topic, and indeed our kind of current sense of this at Ashurst is we're not using the word balance, we're using the work-life fit, and I'm not sure quite how different that is from balance, but you know, tweet Charlie Geffin and ask him. But it's, I mean, there's a lot being done. The technology advances have made a tremendous difference, I think, on balance, far from, if you like, intruding into what you might think of as your own time. I think it's allowed all of us to work a lot more flexibly and to therefore, you know, fit private life and working life around each other much more successfully.
Now, Paul, I know that you've carried out an analysis of sort of working patterns across the department. Is there such a thing in terms of a sort of an average number of hours that people are working, or is it just the M&A lawyers ordering pizza at midnight? I mean,
well, yes. I mean, it's quite interesting when I look at. Obviously, we you know, produce numbers at the end of the year, and there are sort of averages for the departments as well as the firm as a whole. And in general, I'm not a great fan of averages. I always recount the story of the statistician who drowned crossing a river with an average depth of 6 inches. It's
probably a lawyer standing on his head. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, some departments are sort of regarded as high pressure, late nights all the time, and others less so. And yet, when you get to the end of the year and you sort of average everything out, broadly across the firm, the range is not enormous. And I think the fact is the type of work you do very much sort of will affect how easy it is to make that dinner appointment or get down to a gig in the middle of the week. You can't take it for granted that you will, but the sort of high, what are regarded as the high pressure areas are really the transactional ones, and it's transactions that are, if you like, not unmanageable, but they're far more difficult to manage. I have a practice that is a mix of transactional and non-transactional work. The non-transactional stuff I can manage on the whole, and most of my clients want to talk to me, in normal working hours. When the transactions are happening, they just happen. They have a sort of life and a timetable of their own, and things just have to get done. And therefore, you are on parade when they need to get done.
Lucy, you made a good point when we were chatting earlier about that actually this situation of improbable working hours is by no means unique to law, though. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. I was just saying that my friend Annabelle works in PR and her job is unpredictable. Obviously, finance is unpredictable. Other areas within the law firm can be more unpredictable. Not just transactional departments. Other more advisory departments may require you to work particularly hard if you need to deliver a certain piece of advice.
And of course, dealing with offices around the world and clients around the world, I mean, of course, they'll come on stream at all sorts of odd times, and it might be very early in the morning, it might be very late at night, and to some extent you have to work your way around that as well. And being where we are, here in England, it's great in some senses being right in the middle, but it can mean an extremely long day if you happen to be working right around the globe on something.
And when I was in Hong Kong, I found that a lot of the associates and partners readily completed their full day, their full working hours from 9 in the morning. But like you say, if you're working on a project with people around the world, which everything I work on at Baker and McKenzie is, if you're based in the Far East or in the US, you'll often have to do your working hours but then fit in with everybody else. I think in London we're very well placed generally to work more reasonable hours.
I was going to say, I just think that listening to all of this, I think the technology really helps now, because I think most people are comfortable, whether we private practice or in-house, that if you have to, or an emergency or think something at home, you can do that. Or I think a lot of people are comfortable with the idea that you can maybe go home, leave your desk, be at home for bath time or dinner time, and then get online later on, and the work's getting done, and you're finding that balance. I think the technology has been a real help in the past few years.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And do you think that's just more in the in-house, or from a private practice perspective, are you looking at using technology and deploying it more to enable this?
We are.
Yeah.
I mean, I was able to do what I did with the children by using the technology to my advantage, and the time I was having my children was just when the whole internet thing was taking off. It makes sound a bit very old-fashioned saying that, doesn't it? But so I used to go home, do bath time, get the kids to bed, and then quite often I used to log back on at sort of 8, 9 o'clock at night, then work till sort of midnight, and manage my working day like that. So it was sort of in two chunks. The office hours actually spent in the office, and then later on in the evening working from home. And it worked because a lot of my job was reviewing other people's work, reading documents, which can be done at home quite easily.
Isn't there a downside to that though, Paul? Because I sometimes regale my trainees with the story that my first job in the property team was opening the post, which they look at me with their mouths open. But isn't there an expectation from clients now from the instant response when you are totally plugged in the whole time?
There can be, indeed, and I think we're sitting there with an array of clients. They're just dealing with us on a particular matter that needs doing now, and they can be extremely demanding, and views vary. When one talks about this to some of one's colleagues about actually quite how amenable you should make yourself, or whether being constantly available is actually, if you like, slightly devaluing your service. But you've got to be pretty brave with some clients to not get on that BlackBerry straight away and respond.
I think it does depend on the client, but I think most people would realise that you do have to sleep, and there may be points within the working day where you're caught up in other meetings. So if you don't respond within 2 hours, the world isn't going to end. Although, as you say, it perhaps does depend on the demandingness of the individual client.
I think you have to be firm, and you in all these things, you can't let anybody just sort of walk all over you. You've got to be firm and say, well, this is the practicality of it, and things will get done. Don't worry, and they will get done.
Now, the Twitter sphere is lighting up, which is fantastic. And we've got a great question from Ellie about how often do women return to law after maternity leave? So I'd like to talk a little bit about women in the industry. I'd just like to say from my perspective, I'm very proud that our firm has for the last 3 years made up 3 partners who are actually on maternity leave at the time, which I'm told is pretty special, as it were. But Delphine, I don't mean to be sexist, but the question I have in front of me is how easily can women rise up the ranks when you've got so much that needs to be balanced?
I think it can be done. I think the initial question was how many women do return from maternity leave, and I think that the vast majority do. And increasingly law firms are looking at ways to make it easier. Most firms will have people who are working flexibly. I mean, there's a young associate in my team who, having come back from maternity leave, came back initially on a 3-day week, and then when she did go back to a 5-day week, she still works 1 day from home. So I think most firms are very keen to make it work for people who are returning to the office. And yes, you can rise up through the ranks, and I think increasingly we are seeing people, women who are coming back with young children and are moving through the ranks.
I don't think it's an issue that necessarily applies to women. Obviously, women can take longer as maternity leave, paid than unpaid, but isn't it more common for men to take paternity leave now? I mean, I know a couple of men bakers who have been on paternity leave, but how common is it in your company?
I think and again, sort of just to answer the question, I think the concern is that there is a view that, once you are out of the business and you are away from clients from a certain perspective, that your path to your future career may be as a professional support lawyer, or it may be best served at home. As a law firm, we act for most of the top 100 law firm on their legal issues, and I have to say, it would be wrong to say that this isn't a genuinely felt and perceived as an issue as well. But there is more opportunity for men to take the sort of level of paternity leave. But it is an issue. I mean, Anthony, there is a real focus upon the corporate world and PLCs to have more diverse boards and having greater representation at the top table. Do you think that in-house has really grabbed this nettle more?
I think they have and they are. But before I respond to that, I just wanted to come back. That's a great question, and I think it gets back to the point of the whole how you balance. And as a young couple or as a professional couple, I think it's increasingly becoming the place that a conversation will happen where you say, well, we're both aspiring lawyers or whatever our professions are. Who is best placed to take care of the children, and making a kind of adult decision about whether that's the man or the woman. And now it's great that men have the opportunity to take that paternity leave, because I think a lot of men actually want to do it. So that's that. I think it was a great question. I think it's something for men to think about as well going forward. I think in what I've seen in industry is, yes, absolutely, a real big focus on diversity and getting women on the board for very good reasons in terms of how we manage risk in the business world. And I think when you look around the in-house world, there are certainly seem to be a lot more women who have risen up through the ranks to be general counsel. There's a good, I think, representation. Could be a lot better and should be a lot better. But there are a lot of strong female general counsels out there. And I think the culture within a business, I think, increasingly is supportive of that. There are many businesses I've worked in, good networks of the women coming together and supporting and networking and helping each other through all the various challenges. So, and back to the flexibility point, I do believe in some ways the in-house world is perhaps a bit more. There are more opportunities to be flexible working, which perhaps make it easier for women to take time out.
Paul, the accusation thrown at the feet of male partners at city law firms is your trainee intake is likely to be over 50% in relation to male to female ratio, and that's not usually reflected at the partnership table as well.
No, well, certainly the numbers are as they are, and we do take in pretty much sort of half and half. The fact is, we don't have a half and half male-female partnership. But
is that something you're not necessarily Ashurst, but firms are looking to address? Should they address it?
Well, I think
is there a problem?
They are addressing it, but it seems to me that we all want the best people, and we all want to bring on the best people that we've recruited. And it's in our interests as a business to make sure that we do that. I think that, as Delphine said earlier, there's a lot of organisation that has to go into having a family and having a full-time job. And at each point in your sort of career, you make choices about things. Each choice you make is, if you like, necessarily a choice about the things then you haven't chosen to do, whether it's having children, not having children, becoming a lawyer or a doctor or a PR person. And everything, to some extent, therefore, compromises everything else. And it's capable of being worked around. The will is undoubtedly there to work around it, I think, in certainly in private practice across the board. And therefore, everyone, I think, has to, the individuals and the firms have to, work together to make sure it is more accommodating. And I think, there just comes a point where people decide, do I really want to be a partner? And they make that choice not to be. But I think increasingly every sort of opportunity is being made available to allow that choice to be, yes, I do, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to make it.
I think this issue segues beautifully into another issue that we've had raised, which is the issue of diversity generally, not just in relation to male-female, but in relation to ethnically, in relation to sexual orientation. To Delphine, you recruit for S.J. Berwin. Tell us why diversity is an issue for law firms. Why are law firms looking at this?
Well, I think every law firm, wants to recruit as many able, intellectual, good lawyers as possible. And the only way that you can ensure that you are getting the best people is to cast your net as wide as possible. So it's in the law firm's interests to recruit as diverse a bunch of people as they possibly can. I think there's a lot to be said for having different people in the firm. We're all different, we all work differently, we have different skill sets, we have different ideas. It's only by combining all those differences that we make ourselves stronger. I think another important consideration that is often missed is that clients are actually expecting and forcing us to become more diverse as well, and that many clients, as part of their corporate responsibility programs, are actually focusing themselves on diversity, and they're looking to their suppliers to support their diversity initiatives. So increasingly we're being asked by our clients, what is your diversity policy? How many people from different backgrounds do you actually recruit? So as well as wanting to improve ourselves by having a diverse intake, we're actually being forced to address the issue as well by our clients.
Now, I want to talk about slightly different kind of diversity, really, which is beyond sort of anything that's sort of externally visible, as it were, or more obvious ones. But in terms of, we had a question about someone feeling they were born on the wrong side of the tracks, you know, or we have a great question from Lauren about finances as a trainee as well. Tell us what law firms are doing. I mean, there's the old joke that, you know, there are some firms that see diversity as Oxford or Cambridge. But Paul, tell us about, you know, sort of, you know, people from all different backgrounds as opposed to ethnic backgrounds.
Yep. Well, and interestingly, we had quite a discussion about this internally only a few days ago, and we have a sort of, if you like, a diversity manager now who came to us from another sort of major city firm, and we regard this as an important matter. What one doesn't know as a sort of recruitment partner or somebody involved in the recruitment process is, of course, who you're never hearing from, who's never applying to you for one reason or another, and who may have been put off because they weren't given the confidence to go and apply to you know, any leading city firm for whatever reason, and that may go right back to school days and all sorts. So one of the things that we're doing, and I think employers need to do in general, is going out much further to even to sort of schools and other sort of places to make sure that people realise they should feel entirely open to applying. I mean, you know, one of my most successful partners, and you know, said, well, you know, I went to a state school up in the north, and you know, frankly, we'd all be very much the poorer if she weren't one of our partners, and I don't just mean that financially. You know, so our view is, you know, whilst again you can look at statistics and you'll see, well, okay, a certain proportion are Oxbridge and Russell Group universities or whatever. We are very open to any like sort of school background, any you know, wherever you may have come from. We don't just want Southern, you know, public school and Oxbridge people, because it's the individuals who matter. There's somebody with a hand up over there.
I was just going to say, Delphine mentioned that obviously different firms now trying to, sorry, not different firms, different clients, are actually starting to ask about your policy and why and who you're actually employing and things. And I was wondering whether you actually, or did you know of any firms, obviously I don't want you to name names, whether anyone actually positively discriminates, leaving positions open for trainees of a particular background, of a particular ethnic origin. Obviously they're going to be completely qualified, but do you ever get the feeling you're kind of forced to for your firm's reputation, or do you still, because there's always a bit at the end of the form saying ethnic origin.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any firms that do positively discriminate. All I can really speak for is my own firm, but you know, what we're looking for is people who can do the job, you know, who are, you know, technically very good, good commercial nous, able to get on with people. And I think there's a growing understanding, and that you know, those people can come from a number of different backgrounds. It's always very heartwarming when you do get somebody from you know, who have come from a slightly different background, and they really shine at interview, and you sort of think, wow, you know, this is really special.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I mean, I'm finding that as the whole sort of purchasing of legal services has become a lot more procurement-led, that question is being slipped in a lot more. Yeah. And so it is definitely being asked by clients, in my experience, and I'm seeing lots of nods here in terms of that. I'm not sure that any firm has, on its face, sort of said that they're going to positively discriminate as well. But, you know, I think that my own answer to that is you should judge a firm based upon its actual intake. and seeing quite how diverse they are, looking at the partnership, looking at the leaders in the business. I was born in a council estate in Walthamstow, and, you know, have done what I've done based upon, you know, but it has genuinely, the point that's often missed though, is that firms should be only discriminating on the basis of talent. And if someone's born on a council estate but just can't do the work, they're not going to get a job. Yeah. It's if they can, and making sure that the firm does open up those opportunities, that you should be judging a firm on.
And I'd just like to add, you know, for what it's worth, I'm going to share as well. You know, I'm from my parents' council estate in Newcastle. I went to a state school comprehensive. I went to Sussex University not because, you know, I was a bit naive, because it was the best course and it was good, you know, to get the first away from home, to get the independence. I mean, perhaps a naive decision, but the fact is that I still got to levels, and it just underscores the point that if you're ambitious, you're keen, and you are good at what you do, and you get that across in the interview is the key thing, then there's opportunities for everybody, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think if people know that you haven't had a privileged background and you haven't had opportunities handed to you, they'll respect what you've done much more. It sets you apart from other people.
Now, I've got time for a question now. Maria Shod, you want to put your hand up? I think you're in the room. Maria, you had a question for the in-houses, which I will point to me or to Carol or to Anthony to answer.
Okay, my question was basically, when you decided to go into in-house law, was that based on a decision to further it externally, or did that come about afterwards?
Do you mean in terms of going back into private practice, or?
If I direct it to you, Cliff, simply because you started off, say, in-house, or not started off, but you did in-house for Warner Music.
Yep.
And now you're externally. Yes, I just wanted to know how that kind of came about.
All I say is, when I first went into private practice, left private practice to go in-house, I was told that my career was finished. Then when I changed roles in-house, I was told my career was finished. But I have to say, the howls of protest when I said I was going back into private practice from both people in-house and private practice was beyond deafening. Which I just say people just don't know anything. It's finding the right choice for you at the right time, in the right place, at the right firm. And this whole idea of in-house being one amorphous thing that's exactly the same is like saying every firm is the same, or every family is the same, or every job is the same. But I have to say that when I left private practice, I never in a million years thought I would go back to private practice.
I would just add to that. I mean, currently, my thought is that I can't see myself going back to practice from where I am now. My next move would be to be global GC or GC somewhere. But I think one of the great things about law generally, but certainly having had a bit of in-house experience, is that your options are so varied. You know, from where I am right now, I'm thinking maybe, going back to private practice is an option. Setting up my own business is an option. Becoming, leaving the law. I've done a bit of risk management in the past. Becoming a compliance officer, or going and finding a company where I could be chief executive. It's all there, and there's so many options, and I can't underscore that. A legal training, a legal background, whether it be private practice, in-house, is a fantastic place to start.
Carol, did you find it opened up options or closed them down?
I took my job at UBS when I went there on secondment. I was at Clifford Chance before. I was 1 year qualified and I went on secondment, and for me it was like somebody switched the light on. I was getting a bit fed up of being a 1 year qualified. It didn't suit me exactly, and the in-house environment was just perfect. So it was a great way to sample it, see if you like it, and you have the option to go back if you don't. And I stayed there for 15 years. It was great career for me.
From my point of view, I think that I would prefer to stay in private practice for a little bit longer, because going in-house at such a junior level, I felt that I wasn't confident enough in my legal knowledge to be able to advise the business unsupervised, because in the team that I was in, everybody was so busy, there wasn't a direct supervisor who would be on hand all the time if I had questions. Obviously there were people I could run things by, but I think the expectation is much more that you're expected to get on with the work, and it's there's less scrutiny that you're subject to. And in terms of my own personal development, I think I would benefit from the rigour and the scrutiny of most of the work that I do in private practice. And then once I feel a lot more confident and able to advise on my own, that's when I may consider a move in-house if I decide that's right for me then.
Just to speak to that point though, and again, just because every in-house department is different, I left at 6 months qualified and went into an in-house practice. And actually, it's funny, I often describe as my mentor was, you know, probably like learning from Yoda. He literally was the source who knew absolutely everything. And I had more one-to-one tuition and the best business grounding I could ever have had going in that one. So I think it really, really does depend on where you go to. If it is to be in a legal team of 40, that's fine. But if you go to a legal team of 2 and you can learn at the feet of the swamp monster, it can be extraordinary. Great. I'd like you to show your appreciation to the panel, please. Thank you very much indeed.